Eleanor Pryce had kept the keys of Ravensmere Hall for 31 years. She kept them on a chain at her waist, silver keys, worn bright by her own hand. And on the night this story turns, she stood at the end of the great dining table while her master pointed at her across the candlelight and called her a thief. The velvet-lined chest lay open before the guests. The christening silver was gone from it. 9 people had come to dine, and every one of them was looking at her now. She did not weep. She folded her hands over her apron, and she said nothing. The master said it louder, so all 9 would hear. The thief has served under my own roof and eaten my bread. The magistrate at his right hand set down his glass. 31 years of faithful service, and her thanks was a summons for the constable. I will tell you what she did not tell them that night. In a tin box in the still room, she had kept every receipt this house ever made, and 3 of them were written in his own hand. If you have ever given your whole life in loyal service and been treated as though you were nothing, this story is for you. Before we go on, do one small thing for me. Subscribe so Mrs. Pryce's story finds the people who need it. And tell me in the comments what town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this old story travels. Now, let us begin at the beginning, where all such things begin. Ravensmere Hall stood in the green country of Shropshire, 3 miles from the market town of Ludminster, in the year 1873. It was a long grey house with tall chimneys and a walled garden. Rooks nested in the elms behind it. In the morning the whole sky went white with them, and their noise carried down into the kitchens where the fires were already lit. Eleanor had come to it when she was 27 years old. She was a widow then and childless, and she had nothing in the world but a good character written on 1 sheet of paper. The old lady Ravensmere read that paper by a window much like this one. Then she looked at Eleanor for a long moment, the way you look at a horse you mean to buy or a servant you mean to trust with everything. "You have honest eyes," the lady said. "I am tired of clever ones." She gave her the keys that same week. They were the keys to the linen presses, and the plate room, and the wine cellar, and the still room where the preserves were made. They were the keys to a whole life. And Eleanor took them the way another woman might take a wedding ring. She never once, in all the years that followed, forgot the weight of them at her hip. The old lady was a good mistress. Hard when she had to be, and fair the rest of the time, which is more than most can say. She and Eleanor grew old together in that house, one above the stairs and one below, and there came a day when the lady lay dying in the great bedroom with the blue hangings, and it was Eleanor she called for. Not the doctor, not the son. "Come close," the lady said. Her voice was very small by then. Eleanor knelt by the bed and took the thin hand in both of hers. "You have kept my keys 30 years, the lady said. "You will keep them longer than I shall need anything now." She was quiet a while, her eyes closed and opened again. "Keep the house honest, Eleanor, whatever they make of it after me. Keep it honest. That is the only thing I ask." "I will, my lady," Eleanor said. "I promise you that." And the lady smiled, just a little, and let go of her hand. She died before the morning. That was the debt Eleanor carried. Not a debt of money, a debt of a word given to a dying woman. You must understand that, or you will not understand anything that came after. She did not keep faith with the house because it paid her wages. She kept faith with it because she had promised, and a promise, to Eleanor Pryce, was a thing you did not put down until it was done. Now I will tell you about the tin box, because it matters more than anything else in this story, and at the time it seemed to matter not at all. Eleanor kept accounts. She had always kept accounts. It was a thing bred into her bones. When the fishmonger came from Ludminster with the cart, she took his ticket. When the coal was delivered, she took the paper for it. When the tinker mended a pot, or the draper sent cloth, or the chandler brought candles, she took the slip of paper that said what had been bought and what had been paid. And she kept them all. She kept them in a japanned tin box in the still room, black with a little gold pattern flaked half away, and the lid had a dent in one corner where a scullery maid had dropped it years before. Every receipt the house made went into that box. She sorted them by the quarter and tied them with string. The young footman laughed at her for it, quietly, the way the young laugh at the old. What did it matter, an old ticket for a sack of coal 3 years gone? But Eleanor had a saying, and she said it to any girl who came new into her still room. A house that cannot account for a shilling, she would say, cannot be called an honest house. So she kept the receipts. It was habit, and it was duty, and it was nothing more than that. Nobody, least of all Eleanor herself, thought that tin box would ever be worth more than the string that tied its bundles. Remember it. That is all I ask. Remember the tin box in the still room. Now the house had a master, and the master had a secret. The old lady's son was Lord Aldous Merrick, Baron Ravensmere, and he was 51 years old when his mother died and left him the hall. He was a tall man, well made, with a fine loud voice for the hunting field and a finer one for the dinner table. The county thought well of him. He rode to hounds. He sat on the bench at the quarter sessions. He gave good dinners and better wine. And underneath all of it, he was a ruined man. He gambled. That was the plain truth of it, though it took Eleanor a long time to see the whole of it. He gambled at cards in London, and he gambled on horses at the meetings, and he lost. He lost more than a man can lose and keep his land. The rents came in and went straight out again into other men's pockets. The timber was sold off the far end of the estate. The good farm at Weir Bottom was mortgaged, and then the home farm after it. By the autumn of that year there was a man named Josiah Fenn. Fenn was a moneylender out of Shrewsbury, and he held the Lord's markers, the paper scraps that said Lord Aldous owed him money, signed in the Lord's own hand across a card table at midnight. Fenn was not a patient man. He had lent to gentlemen before, and he knew the smell of a gentleman going down. A letter came to Ravensmere in September, and Eleanor carried it up on the silver tray herself. And she saw the master's face go grey as he read it. She did not know what it said. Not then. What it said was this: £2,000 within 30 days, or Josiah Fenn would go to the county and to the courts and make the whole ruin public. £2,000. It might as well have been the moon. The land was pledged to the last acre. The rents were spoken for. There was only one thing left in that house that was not already promised to somebody else: the silver. The christening silver of the Merricks. 3 generations of it, a great chased bowl and a pair of tall candlesticks and a set of apostle spoons kept in the velvet-lined chest, brought out on the high days and shown to the guests. It was the last unpledged treasure of Ravensmere, and it was in Eleanor's charge, under Eleanor's key, as it had been for 31 years. Now I must take you back a little, because the worst thing had already happened by then, and only 2 people in the world knew of it. One was the Lord, the other was Eleanor. And she had been sworn to silence. It was a wet evening in the spring, months before that dinner. The Lord sent for her, which was itself a strange thing, for he rarely spoke to her at all beyond a nod. She came to his study and found him standing at the window with his back to her, and the fire burning low, and the decanter already half down. "Mrs. Pryce," he said, without turning, "you have served this house a long time, 31 years, my lord. My mother trusted you." "She did, my lord." He was quiet a moment. Then he turned, and she saw that his face was the face of a frightened man wearing the manners of a bold one. He told her he had a difficulty. A gentleman's difficulty, he called it, a matter of ready money, a thing that would be set right by Lady Day and no one the wiser. And he needed her help, because she was discreet, and because she held the keys. Then he told her what he wanted. He wanted her to take 3 pieces of the christening silver, the bowl and the 2 candlesticks, and carry them into Ludminster to the shop of a pawnbroker named Silas Cobb, and pawn them, in his name, for whatever Cobb would advance. And to speak of it to no living soul. I shall redeem them by Lady Day, he said. Every piece. It is only a loan against a bad quarter, Mrs. Pryce, nothing more. But it must be quiet. You understand me. A man in my position cannot be seen at a pawnbroker's door. Eleanor stood very still. Everything in her said no. The silver was the old lady's pride. It had christened the Lord himself and his father before him. To carry it into a pawnbroker's shop like a stolen watch, it went against 31 years of everything she was. But he was the master. That was her blind spot, and I will not pretend it was not. Her loyalty was so complete that it had no bottom to it. She had been trained her whole life to obey the family, and here was the family asking, and though her heart went cold, she could not find the word to refuse him. She thought, perhaps, that a good servant helps the house through its bad hour and says nothing. She thought, perhaps, that this was what keeping the house meant. She was wrong. But she did not know it yet. "As you wish, my lord," she said. So she did it. She wrapped the bowl and the candlesticks in green baize and packed them in a hamper under a cloth, and she rode into Ludminster on the carrier's cart on a market day, when one more woman with a basket was nothing to notice, and she found the shop of Silas Cobb. It was a narrow, dim shop with a low door and a smell of dust and metal polish. Cobb himself was a small, spare man, grey as a February morning, with spectacles pushed up on his forehead and ink on his fingers. He was, Eleanor saw at once, an honest man of his trade. He did not ask sly questions. He weighed the silver and tested it, and named a fair price, and he wrote it all down in a great ledger with a spine like a Bible. And he wrote out the tickets, 3 of them, 1 for each parcel, in his neat clerk's hand, and at the head of each he wrote the name of the man the goods were pledged for, because that is the law and the custom of the trade. Not Eleanor Pryce. She was only the messenger, and she gave him the name as she had been ordered to give it. Lord Aldous Merrick, Baron Ravensmere. Cobb wrote it 3 times. 3 tickets, 3 times that name, in his own hand as she spelled it for him. And he counted out the money, and Eleanor signed nothing, and took the money and the 3 little printed slips of paper and carried them home. She gave the master the money that same night, and the tickets, she should have given him the tickets too, and perhaps he thought she had burned them, or lost them, or never thought of them again at all. But Eleanor Pryce did not lose papers. It was not in her. A receipt was a receipt, so she took the 3 pawn tickets into the still room, and she smoothed them flat, and she tied them with the other papers of that quarter, and she put them in the japanned tin box with the dented corner. A house that cannot account for a shilling cannot be called an honest house. She put them away out of pure habit. She did not keep them to save herself. She had no notion, that spring night, that she would ever need saving. She kept them because keeping papers was what she did, the way another woman breathes. Lady Day came and went. The silver was not redeemed. Eleanor waited for the master to send her back into Ludminster with the money to fetch it home. He never did. She understood, slowly, that he could not. There was no money. There was never going to be money. The 3 pieces of the christening silver were gone, and they were not coming back, and she was the only soul beside the Lord himself who knew it. She held her tongue. She had promised silence, and she kept it, even now, even though it sat in her stomach like a swallowed stone. She had done a wrong thing in a good cause, and she could not undo it. So she carried it, the way she carried everything, and she said her prayers and kept her keys and went on. Then the whispers began. It was a footman who noticed first a sharp-eyed young fellow laying the table for a shooting party in the autumn. He went to the plate chest for the great bowl to set at the centre, and it was not there, nor the candlesticks. He came to Eleanor puzzled, and she told him some tale that the pieces were away being cleaned and mended at the silversmith's in Shrewsbury, and he believed her. Because why should he not? But servants talk, you cannot stop them. A thing missed once is a thing remembered, and soon there was a murmur below stairs. Where was the christening silver? Why did it never come out now? And the murmur, being a murmur, grew as it went, until there were girls in the scullery who half believed the bowl had been spirited away by somebody, and looked sideways at one another, and wondered. And upstairs the Lord grew frantic. For a second letter came from Josiah Fenn, harder than the first. The 30 days were counting down, and now the Lord had a new terror on top of the old one. Not only was he ruined, but the silver was missing, plainly missing, and people were beginning to notice. And if it were ever known that he himself had pawned his own family plate to pay a card debt, he was finished in the county. No bench, no dinners, no standing. A gentleman may be poor and forgiven. A gentleman who sells his christening silver over a pawnbroker's counter is a gentleman no more. He had to explain the empty chest. And he had to explain it without confessing what he had done. Do you see it now? Do you see the shape of the thing coming? He needed a thief. He needed someone else to have taken the silver, someone below him, someone whose word was worth nothing against his, someone who held the keys to the plate room and could be shown to have had every chance. He needed a servant to hang it on. And there she was, right under his roof, the very woman who had carried the silver into Ludminster with her own hands. I do not think he planned it all at once. Cold, I think it came to him piece by piece, the way a bad idea comes to a desperate man, each step seeming almost reasonable until the whole black staircase is built. But build it he did. And the Michaelmas dinner was to be the stage of it. The dinner was set for the last week of September. 9 guests were bidden, the rector and his wife, 2 neighbouring squires, a Colonel home from India, a pair of ladies from the far side of the county, and, at the head of the honoured places, Sir Henry Ashford, a landowner and the county magistrate, a heavy, quiet man with a long memory and a reputation for fairness that even those he'd sentenced did not dispute. It was to be a grand night, and the Lord let it be known below stairs that the christening silver was to be brought out and shown, that the great bowl was come home from the silversmiths at last, restored, and would sit in its velvet chest at the centre of the table for all to admire. Eleanor heard this and went cold to the marrow. She knew there was no bowl. She knew the chest was empty. She could not think what he meant to do. She told herself he must have found the money and redeemed the pieces after all, and said nothing to her out of pride. She wanted to believe it. She dressed the table herself that evening in her best black, her keys bright at her waist, and she set the empty velvet chest in the place of honour as she had been told, and she did not open it, because it was not her place to open it, and she waited. The guests came at 7. The soup went up, and the fish, and the meats. Eleanor stood by the sideboard as she had stood at 1,000 such dinners, directing the footman with a look, a nod, the small silent language of 31 years. The candles burned. The wine went round. The talk was easy and loud. Sir Henry ate slowly and said little, and watched the room the way such men do. And then, between the courses, the Lord rose to his feet. He was smiling. He had a glass in his hand. He said he had a small thing to show his friends, a family treasure, the christening silver of the Merricks, 3 generations old, and he laid his hand on the velvet chest. Eleanor's heart stopped in her breast. He threw back the lid. The chest was empty. The green velvet lay bare and dented where the silver had rested for 100 years. There was a little sound around the table, a drawing in of breath, and the smiles faltered, and the Lord stood looking down into the emptiness with an expression of such shock, such wounded astonishment, that Eleanor almost believed it herself. Then he lifted his head and looked straight down the table at her. Gone, he said softly. It is gone. The room went very still. Who has held the keys to my plate room? He said, and his voice was rising now, filling the room, made for exactly this. Who has had the running of this house, and the trust of my late mother, God rest her, these 30 years? Who alone could have taken it, and sold it, and thought an old woman's word would never be doubted? And he pointed at her. Down the length of the white cloth, past the candles and the wine and the 9 turned faces, he pointed at Eleanor Pryce. The thief has served under my own roof, he said, and eaten my bread. I want you to see her in that moment. I want you to see what she did. She did not cry out. She did not fall to her knees or fling up her hands or beg. Every eye in that room was on her, and half of them already believed him, because he was the master and she was the servant, and that is how the world was built. The rector's wife had a hand at her throat. The colonel had turned in his chair, and Sir Henry Ashford, the magistrate, had set down his wine-glass very slowly and was looking at Eleanor with an expression she could not read. Eleanor Pryce stood straight in her black gown. She folded her hands over her apron, one over the other, the way she had folded them 10,000 times. And she said nothing at all. There is a kind of silence that is louder than any scream. That was the silence she gave him. She looked at him, the man she had served for 31 years, the son of the woman she had loved, and she let him see that she knew what he was. And she held her tongue. She could have spoken. She could have cried out, then and there, before them all, I carried it to Ludminster on your own order, my lord. I have the tickets in your name. She could have. Some part of her wanted to, with a heat that frightened her. But she did not, because a thing said in that heat, servant against master, would have sounded like the wild lie of a woman cornered. And because, and this she only half understood in the moment, she had the proof, and proof does not need to shout. Proof waits. Proof keeps. Like a receipt in a tin box, so she held her silence and let him think he had won. Send for the constable, the Lord said. In the morning. Let it be done properly. I'll not have it said I dealt unjustly, even with such as this. He turned to his guests with a spread of his hands, a man grieved to his soul. Forgive me, my friends, that such a thing should happen at my table. Sir Henry, you will know what is right to be done. Sir Henry did not answer at once. He looked at the empty chest, he looked at the Lord, and he looked, longest of all, at the old woman standing straight by the sideboard with her hands folded and no fear in her face. Then he said, in his slow, heavy voice, we shall see it done properly. Yes, and that was the end of the dinner. They did not wait for the morning to strip her of the keys. That was done that same night, and it was done in front of the guests, and I believe he did it so because he wanted them to see it, to fix her guilt in their minds past all undoing. When the ladies had withdrawn and the men sat over their wine, the Lord called Eleanor into the room again. She came. She stood before them all. The keys, he said, and held out his hand. They hung at her waist on the silver chain, the chatelaine keys, the badge of her office, the very keys the old lady had put into her hand 31 years before. She had worn them every waking day of her life since. They had grown warm against her hip in summer and cold in winter. They were more hers than anything she owned. She unhooked the chain with steady fingers. She did not let them see her hands shake, though shake they did, somewhere down under the stillness. She lifted the keys from her waist, and she laid them in his open palm, and for one moment their eyes met over the little bright heap of them, and she said the only words she spoke that whole long night. The house is honest, my lord, she said. It always was. He did not understand her. He thought it a servant's whining. But it was the old lady's own charge given back to him like a blade laid flat, and Sir Henry Ashford, watching, heard something in it and frowned, and remembered it after. They put her out at the door with a single trunk. Not that night. Even he would not turn a woman into the dark. But at first light, before the household was properly up, a trap was brought round, and her one trunk was set in the back of it, packed by her own hands with the few things that were truly hers. No character was given her. A servant dismissed for theft gets no letter of good service. That was the cruelty inside the cruelty. 31 years, and she went out of the gates of Ravensmere with nothing but a trunk and her name blackened behind her. She did not look back at the house. She looked at the elms and the rooks going up white against the morning, and she thought of an old woman in a blue hung room saying, "Keep the house honest, Eleanor," and she thought, "I have kept it. Whatever they make of me, I kept it honest," and he did not. The village was 3 miles off, and by the time she reached it, the story had gone before her. That is the way of villages. A thing whispered at the hall at midnight is common talk at the pump by noon. Mrs. Pryce, the housekeeper, turned off for stealing the master's silver. 30 years of trust, and this her thanks. And what could you expect? Some said, still waters. You never know them, do you? Doors that had opened to her for a lifetime did not open now. Women she had known for 30 years found somewhere else to look when she passed. And then the worst turn of all, the one that cut the deepest, because it took the truth and bent it into a lie. Someone remembered a woman with a covered hamper on the carrier's cart, months back, going into Ludminster of a market day. Someone remembered, for a maid from the hall had a sister in the town, that Mrs. Pryce had been seen at Silas Cobb's shop, at the pawnbroker's. And there it was. The proof, they said, the proof of everything. Why would an honest housekeeper go creeping to a pawnbroker with a covered basket, if not to sell what was not hers? The very errand the Lord had forced upon her, sworn her to secrecy over, his crime, done by her hands, was turned about and hung round her neck as the plainest sign of her guilt. The one true thing anyone knew became the strongest lie against her. She could not even explain it. To explain it was to tell the whole tale, and who would believe her word against his, with the silver gone and her caught, as they thought, red-handed at the pawnbroker's door? She took a room in the town, a poor bare room over a hardware shop, up a stair that smelled of oil and iron filings, with a narrow bed and a chair and a window that looked out on the grey slate roofs. She paid for it out of the little she had saved in 31 years of wages, which was not much, for she had never been paid much. And there she sat, in the first days, with her hands folded in her lap and nothing to do with them, and no keys at her waist, and the whole town certain she was a thief. I will not pretend she was not brought low. She was. There were nights in that bare room when she wept, an old woman alone, for the house she had lost, and the name she had lost, and the mistress who was dead, and could not speak for her. She had given her whole life to Ravensmere, and Ravensmere had put her out in the road like a servant who has broken the good china. If you have ever been that person, the one who gave everything, and was thanked with a lie, then you know the taste of those nights. You know it in your own mouth. But here is the thing about Eleanor Pryce. She could be brought low. She could not be broken. There came a young man to her door. It was on the 3rd or 4th day, in the evening. A knock, timid, and when she opened it there stood Tom Fletcher, the footman from the hall, 19 years old, gangling, his cap turning round and round in his big hands. He had walked the 3 miles from Ravensmere on his half-day, and told no one where he was going. "Mrs. Pryce," he said, and then he could not seem to find the rest of it. She let him in. She gave him the chair and sat herself on the edge of the bed, because there was nowhere else. "I don't believe it," Tom said, all in a rush, the words tumbling out of him now that he had begun. "I don't believe a word of it, ma'am, and there's others below stairs as don't neither, only they daren't say. You'd not steal a pin. Not you. I've known you since I were a boy in the boot room, and you'd not steal a pin." He stopped, red to the ears. "I had to come and say it. That's all. I had to come and say I don't believe it, and Eleanor Pryce, who had not broken in front of 9 guests and a magistrate, felt her eyes sting at that. A footman turning his cap in his hands, the first soul in the world to say to her face that she was no thief. "Thank you, Tom," she said quietly. "You don't know what that's worth." Then Tom said the thing that changed everything. He said it not knowing what he said, the way the young let slip the very fact that matters. "And it's a queer thing," he said, frowning, "for I remember the cart. That spring. You going into Ludminster with the hamper, and the master seeing you off from the side door himself, which he never did, and telling you to mind and be quiet about it. I remember it plain, because I thought at the time, what's her ladyship's silver want with a covered basket? Only I never." He stopped. He looked at her. And something moved behind his young face as the pieces began, dimly, to fit. Eleanor sat very still on the edge of the narrow bed, the master seeing you off himself, telling you to be quiet. Tom had seen it. There was a witness to the errand, to the Lord's own order, to the secrecy he had sworn her to. She was not, after all, entirely alone with the truth. And in that bare room over the hardware shop, with the smell of oil coming up the stair and the grey roofs going dark in the window, Eleanor Pryce felt something turn over in her breast that she had not felt in many days. It was not hope, exactly. It was harder than hope. It was resolve. She rose from the bed. She crossed to the trunk in the corner, and she knelt, and she opened it. And from under the folded black gowns and the good winter shawl she drew out a thing that Tom did not understand the meaning of. A small japanned tin box, black, with a little gold pattern half flaked away, and a dent in one corner. She set it on the chair where the candlelight fell. Her hands were not quite steady now. She lifted the lid. Inside were the bundles of papers, tied by the quarter with string, the receipts of a lifetime of keeping the house honest. She found the bundle of that spring. She untied the string. And there, folded flat among the tickets for coal and candles and a mended pot, were 3 small printed slips. She unfolded them one by one on the seat of the chair, and Tom leaned in to see, and could make nothing of them, for he could barely read. But Eleanor could read. Eleanor could read every word. 3 pawn tickets from the shop of Silas Cobb of Ludminster, 1 for a chased silver bowl, 1 and 1 for a pair of tall candlesticks, each with its date and its sum advanced, and at the head of each, in Silas Cobb's own neat clerk's hand, 3 times over, 1 name. Lord Aldous Merrick, Baron Ravensmere. Not her name. His name. In his name, for goods he had ordered pawned, kept by the one person in all the world he had been certain would leave no trace, because he believed a servant is a thing you use and throw down. A hand that does your work and keeps nothing, an instrument that cannot turn in your grip. He had made her the instrument of his crime. And she had kept the receipt. "Tom," Eleanor said. Her voice was very quiet and very level, and there was something in it now that had not been there since the night of the dinner. "How would you like to take a walk into Ludminster for me? To Mr. Cobb's shop?" Tom looked from the 3 slips of paper to her face, not yet understanding, only feeling that something enormous had shifted in that little room. "What are they, ma'am?" he asked. Eleanor Pryce looked down at the 3 tickets on the chair, at the Lord's own name written 3 times over by an honest man's hand, and for the first time in many days, something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "They're the receipt," she said. "For an honest house." The walk into Ludminster took the better part of an hour. Eleanor did not walk it herself. She sent Tom, in the grey light before the shops opened, with a note folded small in his fist and the 3 tickets kept back safe in the tin box under her own bed. She would not let those slips out of the house. Not yet. What she sent was a question, and what she wanted was an answer she could stand on. The question was simple. Do the tickets still stand on Mr. Cobb's books? Are the entries there, in his ledger, in his hand, the same as the slips she held, because a slip of paper can be called a forgery. A slip of paper can be waved away by a man with a title and a lawyer, but a pawnbroker's ledger is a different thing. It is kept day by day. It is written in ink that dries in its own time. It cannot be got up overnight to suit a housekeeper's grievance. She had thought all this out in the small room over the hardware shop, sitting with the tin box on her knees while the town slept. She had turned it every way she knew, and she had come to a hard, clear place. She would not go begging. She would not write a soft letter to the magistrate asking, "Please, sir, might he look into the matter of a wronged old woman?" That was the servant's way, and the servant's way had put her on the doorstep with one trunk and no character. No, she would answer the charge where the charge was made. At Ravensmere, at that same long table, before those same 9 faces, with the law seated at the head to hear it. That was the decision. It sat in her like a swallowed stone, heavy and certain. Tom came back at noon with mud to his knees, and his face lit up like a boy who has run 3 miles with good news and cannot hold it. "They stand, ma'am," he said before he was even through the door. "Mr. Cobb showed me the book himself. Every one. The bowl and the 2 candlesticks and the dates and the money paid out, all wrote down plain. And the name at the top of every line." He stopped and swallowed, because saying it aloud still frightened him a little. The Lord's name. Wrote by Mr. Cobb, as the Lord gave it him. Eleanor let out a breath she felt she had been holding for weeks. "And did you ask him," she said, "would he swear to it, if it came to swearing?" Tom nodded hard. He said an honest ledger swears for itself. He said he'd not lie for any man, lord nor commoner. He said, and here Tom coloured. Because he was repeating something that had plainly moved him, he said a shop like his Lives or Dies on its book being true, and he'd not burn 30 years of good name to save a baron's face. "Good," said Eleanor. "Good man." And she meant it, for Silas Cobb was no friend of hers, only a tradesman who had done his trade and kept his records straight, and it turned out that a man who keeps his records straight is worth more in a bad hour than a dozen who swear they love you. But she was not easy. She knew the Lord too well to think him blind. 31 years of watching a man tells you how he moves when he is frightened, and Lord Aldous Merrick was frightened now, whether he knew the ticket survived or not. A frightened man with a title reaches for whatever is nearest, and what was nearest to hand was the constable, the whisper, the weight of his own standing pressing down on a woman who had none. She was right to fear it. Within 2 days the trouble came. It came through Josiah Fenn. Fenn, the moneylender out of Shrewsbury, had his own men about the country, and one of them had been in Ludminster and had seen a footman from Ravensmere going in and out of the pawnbroker's shop and asking after old entries. Fenn wanted his £2,000. Fenn did not care a straw for Eleanor Pryce, but he cared very much that the silver he had, been half promised as security, had been quietly sold out from under him, and he cared that someone was now nosing about the record of that sale. So Fenn sent a word to the Lord. "A servant has been at Cobb's, reading his book. You had best see what your servant kept." Eleanor did not know this at the time. She only knew that on the 3rd day Tom came to her white-faced and out of breath and said the still room at the hall had been turned inside out. "He had them pull it apart, ma'am," Tom said. "Every jar off the shelf. The floor up in the corner where it's loose." He stood there himself and watched them do it, and he kept saying, "There's a box. There's a tin box she kept. Find me the tin box." Eleanor's heart went cold, and then, oddly, warm, because she understood in one stroke 2 things at once. He knew about the box, and he did not have it. And did they find it, she asked, though she knew they had not, for the box was under her own bed not 100 yards from where she sat. "No, ma'am." A grin fought its way onto Tom's frightened face. Because Sarah had it out already. Sarah was the undermaid, a plain, quiet girl of 19 who had scrubbed the still-room floor these 2 years and had never had a kind word from anyone in that house but Eleanor Pryce. When the whispers started and the mistress of 31 years was put out at the door, Sarah had done a small, brave thing without being asked. She had gathered up the housekeeper's own belongings from the still room before anyone thought to lock it, the aprons, the mending basket, the little private things, and among them, not knowing what it was, she had carried out the japanned tin box with the dented corner, and brought it round to the lodging over the hardware shop, and left it with a mumbled word, and fled, before she could be thanked. So when the Lord tore his own still room to splinters looking for the proof of his crime, the proof was already gone. Carried out under his nose by a girl he had never once looked in the eye. Eleanor sat very still when Tom told her this. Then she said, quietly, "There's a lesson in that, Tom, and I hope you keep it. A man who treats the low folk as if they were furniture forgets that furniture has ears and hands." She folded her own hands over her apron in the old way. He never saw Sarah, not once in 2 years. That's why he can't find his box. The relief of it held for perhaps a day. Then the second fright came, and it was worse, because it reached toward the ledger itself. Fen was not a patient man, and he was cleverer than the Lord. He worked out quickly enough where the danger truly lay. It did not lie with the housekeeper's slips of paper, which a court might doubt. It lay with the pawnbroker's book, which no court would. So Fen went to Silas Cobb himself. He did not threaten, not at first. He was smooth. He sat in Cobb's little shop among the unredeemed clocks and the trays of rings, and he said, in effect, that there were entries in Cobb's book concerning a certain noble family that would do a great deal of harm if they came to light, and that harm to a great family had a way of spreading to the small men round about it, and that he, Fen, was prepared to be generous. He would buy the tickets outright, and the entries with them at a good price, and the whole matter could be quietly put away and forgotten, and no honest shopkeeper the worse for it. Silas Cobb was a small man with ink-stained fingers and no fortune to speak of, and £2,000 of trouble breathing on him across his own counter. He was frightened. Any man would be. Eleanor learned afterward that he had gone home that night and told his wife they might sell up and go to her people in Cheshire, that the county was turning bad, that a pawnbroker who crossed a baron might find his licence gone and his shop shut and himself with nothing. But Silas Cobb had kept an honest ledger for 30 years, and there is a kind of stubbornness in an honest man that even fright cannot quite drown. He said no to Fen. He said his book was his book, and it was not for sale, not the paper of it, nor the truth of it. And then, being frightened, he began to think that perhaps the safest thing was to close the shop for a while and take his wife to Cheshire after all, and let the great folk fight it out among themselves without his book on the table. It was Tom, again, who saved it. Tom had gone back to Ludminster on his own account, uneasy, wanting to be sure. He found Cobb half packing, the shutters already up on one window, and Tom, 19 years old and no scholar, did the one wise thing that a wiser head might have missed. He said, "Mr. Cobb, you needn't stand up in any court yourself if it frights you so, but will you make me copies? Fair copies of the 3 entries, signed by your hand and marked true, so that whatever becomes of you or your shop, the truth of the book still stands where a magistrate can read it." Cobb saw the sense of it at once. A man may run, but a certified copy stays. He sat down at his counter that very afternoon and copied the 3 entries out in his careful clerk's hand. Each word matched to the book, and at the foot of each he wrote that it was a true copy of an entry made on such a date in the ledger of Silas Cobb, pawnbroker, of Ludminster, and he signed his name. And he pressed his shop's little seal into the wax. 3 fair copies. And he gave them to Tom, and something eased in his own chest as he did it, for now the thing did not rest on him alone. Tom carried them back to Eleanor as if he carried the host. And Eleanor, when she laid the 3 copies beside the 3 tickets, on the seat of her one chair and saw how they matched, word for word, sum for sum, name for name, felt the ground go firm under her at last. Now she had two things where the Lord thought she had nothing. She had the tickets, in his own name, and she had the ledger's own witness that the tickets were true. She had, in the plain language of the still-room she had ruled so long, an account that would balance. A house that could account for every shilling. An honest house proved on paper in the hand of the very man who had tried to make her the thief. She should have moved then. She knew it afterward. But she was an old woman and a careful one, and she wanted one thing more before she struck. She wanted the law itself in the room. She would not lay her proof before a mob or a whispering village. She would lay it before Sir Henry Ashford, the magistrate, the same man who had sat at the Lord's right hand and set down his glass when the charge was made. And getting the law into the room took a few days more, and in those few days the Lord and Fen between them nearly closed the trap on her instead. For Sir Henry, uneasy as he was still a magistrate, and a charge had been laid before him by a baron, in his own house, before 9 witnesses. He could not simply let it lie. The forms of the law had to run. A woman accused of stealing the christening silver of a great house must be brought and examined, and, if the case looked black, committed to await the assize. And the case, on its face, looked black. A servant seen at a pawnbroker's shop, silver missing from the chest, the master's own word before gentlemen. So Sir Henry, doing his duty with a heavy heart, gave the order that Eleanor Pryce be brought in. The constable came for her on a wet grey morning, and with him, worse, came word that her goods were to be gathered as evidence, and among her goods, at the coach office, where her larger trunk had been left in store, was found the japanned tin box. For one terrible hour, the box was in the Lord's reach. The constable, told by someone, Fenn's man, no doubt, that the stolen property might be hid in the housekeeper's own boxes, seized the tin box at the coach office and set it aside to be opened before the magistrate. And in that box, plain to any eye that opened it, were the 3 tickets that would either hang the Lord or, if the wrong hand got them first, and the fire was near, vanish into smoke and leave Eleanor with nothing but her word. Eleanor did not panic. She had spent 31 years not panicking, running a great house through fires and floods and deaths and a mistress's long dying, and she did not begin now. She sat in the constable's small cold room and she said, very levelly, one sentence. "Whatever is in that box, sir, I will thank you to open it only before Sir Henry Ashford, and before no other soul. For it is evidence, as you say, and evidence that is opened in a corner is worth nothing to any court." The constable, an honest, plodding man, could find no fault in that. It was the law's own rule, spoken back to him by a housekeeper. He set the box by, unopened, to be carried to the magistrate, and Tom, meanwhile, had already done what mattered most. The certified copies, Cobb's own fair copies, sealed and signed, those had never been in the trunk at all. Tom had carried them straight to the clerk of Sir Henry Ashford 2 days before, and left them in the clerk's own hand, with a plain message, that when the matter of the Ravensmere silver came before the magistrate, these 3 papers spoke to it, and begged only to be read. So when the Lord and Fen thought they had closed their fist on the last of the proof, they had closed it on the tin box only, and the tin box was to be opened before the one man they could not bribe, and its twin was already lying safe on the magistrate's own desk. The trap, so carefully set for Eleanor, had been built with its own door open at the back. She asked one thing before they would take her to any cell. She asked it of the constable, and he carried it to Sir Henry, and Sir Henry, being at bottom a fair man and more uneasy every hour, granted it. She asked that she be examined not in a back room and not committed in silence, but that she answer the charge in the place where the charge was made. At Ravensmere. At that table, before the same 9 who had heard her named a thief. "If I am to be shamed," was the word she sent, let it be undone, or made good in the same room it was done in. I have served that house 31 years. I will answer for myself in its dining room, or nowhere." Sir Henry read that message twice. Then he said to his clerk, "Send to Lord Ravensmere. His guests of the Michaelmas dinner are to be asked to attend at the hall 3 days hence, and I with them. The charge he laid at his own table shall be tried at his own table. That is only just." And he looked for a long moment at the 3 sealed copies lying on his desk, though he did not yet read them aloud, for he was a careful man and would do it in its proper place. But his face, his clerk said afterward, was the face of a man who has begun to suspect which way a thing will fall. So it was arranged. And on the appointed day, in the last week of September, 1 year almost to the day from the night she was named a thief, Eleanor Pryce went back into Ravensmere Hall. She went in by the front door. That was Sir Henry's doing, and it was deliberate, and every soul in the house understood it. 31 years she had gone in and out by the servants' passage, and on the night of her disgrace she had been put out at the side door with her trunk. Now she came up the front steps between the 2 stone lions, in her plain grey gown, with her hands folded, and the footman, Tom, among them, standing very straight and proud, opened the great doors to her as though she were a lady of the county. The dining room was as it had been. The long table, the white cloth, the candles lit though it was afternoon. The 9 guests were there, summoned back, curious and grave, the rector and 2 of the county families, and old Colonel Baird, and the others who had watched her keys torn from her waist. Sir Henry Ashford sat at the head, where the master usually sat, and that too was deliberate, for today the law kept the head of the table. And there, in his own house, but not at its head, stood Lord Aldous Merrick, Baron Ravensmere, in his good coat, with his colour high and his manner easy. For he believed still that he was the accuser and she the accused, and he did not know what was in the tin box, and he was certain as he was of his own name, that a servant leaves no trace. The constable stood at the door. On the white cloth, in the centre where the velvet chest had stood a year ago, there now stood the japanned tin box with its dented corner, unopened, waiting. Sir Henry opened the proceeding plainly. He said the charge was theft of the estate silver, laid by Lord Ravensmere against Eleanor Pryce, late housekeeper, before these same witnesses a 12 months since. He said the accused had asked to answer it here, and he had thought it just to allow her. He asked the Lord, would he state his charge again, before the company, that all might hear it fresh. And the Lord did. That was his undoing, though he could not know it. He was too sure of himself to be brief. He stood, and he laid his hand on the back of his chair, and he told it all again in his rolling voice, the missing christening silver, the great chased bowl, and the tall candlesticks that had christened 3 generations of Merricks, gone from the chest, and the woman trusted. Given the keys, seen with her own body at a pawnbroker's shop in Ludminster, and how it grieved him, how it wounded him, that one who had eaten his bread these 30 years should have robbed the house that sheltered her. The thief, he said, and he said it slowly, savouring it, has served under my own roof. He sat down. He was pleased. He looked at Eleanor with the mild contempt of a man looking at a thing already broken. Sir Henry turned to her. "Eleanor Pryce, you have heard the charge. What do you say to it?" Eleanor Pryce stepped forward to the table. She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life raised her voice in that room, and she did not begin now. "I say, sir," she answered, "that the silver was never stolen. It was pawned. And it was pawned on the order of the master of this house to a pawnbroker in Ludminster, in the master's own name. And I say that I can prove it, because it was my whole life's habit to keep the account of an honest house, every receipt, every ticket, every slip of paper this household ever made. I kept them because my late mistress bade me keep the house honest, and I could not think of a house as honest that could not account for a shilling. She laid her hand on the lid of the tin box. "It is all here, sir, in this box. In his name." She lifted the lid, she reached in, and she drew out the 3 pawn tickets, and she unfolded them one at a time, slowly, on the white cloth, in the candlelight before the 9. 1 chased silver bowl, she said, laying down the first. 1 tall candlestick. She laid down the second. 1 tall candlestick. Its pair. She laid down the third. And then she looked up, once, at Lord Aldous Merrick, and she spoke the only sharp words she would speak that day, and they were very quiet. "You signed for them yourself, my lord. I only kept the receipt." The silence that came down on that room was the deepest Eleanor had ever heard in it, and she had heard it emptied and full, in mourning and in feast, for 31 years. Sir Henry Ashford rose from the head of the table. He came round to where the 3 slips lay. He took up the first, and he held it to the candle, and he read it aloud in the flat, clear voice of a man reading a legal thing, so that no one could pretend afterward to have misheard. "Received of Lord Aldous Merrick, Baron Ravensmere," he read, "1 silver bowl, chased, advanced against the same." And he read the date, and the sum. And then he read, and here his voice did not change at all, which made it worse, in the name of Aldous Merrick, Baron Ravensmere. He set it down. He took up the second and read it. He took up the third and read it. 3 times the same name fell into the silent room, in the flat voice of the law. Aldous Merrick. Aldous Merrick. Aldous Merrick. Not Eleanor Pryce. Not once, in any hand, on any slip, the name of the woman he had called a thief. Then Tom Fletcher stepped up from his place by the wall, and he laid down beside the 3 tickets 3 other papers, the certified copies, sealed with Silas Cobb's own seal, and Sir Henry took them up and compared them, line by line, word by word, and said at the last to the whole table, "These are fair copies of the pawnbroker's ledger, certified under his hand and seal. They answer to the tickets in every particular. The pieces named in the charge were not stolen. They were pawned by their owner. To pay, I do not doubt, some debt he did not wish this company to know of." He set the papers down. He looked for a long moment at Lord Aldous Merrick, and then he said, quietly, the sentence that ended it. "My lord, you have accused an innocent woman of your own act, and you have done it before witnesses, and before me." The lord had gone the colour of the ash in the grate. For a moment he said nothing at all. Then he did the thing that finished him, the thing Eleanor had almost pitied him for. Watching it, he could not stop himself. He fixed his eyes on the tickets, and he said, half to himself, in a voice cracked open with disbelief, "You were to have destroyed them. You had no cause to keep them. Why in God's name would a servant keep them?" And he heard it. He heard, in the dead silent room, with the magistrate's eyes upon him, what he had just said aloud, that he had known of them, that he had expected them destroyed, that his one defence, "I never pawned it, this is a forgery, this is a servant's spite," had just been strangled in his own throat by his own tongue. He had not said, "These are false." He had said, "Why did you keep them?" A man does not ask why a lie was kept. He asks it only of the truth. Colonel Baird, an old blunt man, made a low sound and turned his face away. The rector looked down at his own hands. And Lord Aldous Merrick stood in the middle of his own dining room and understood, at last, that he had built his ruin with his own mouth twice, once when he named her thief, and once, just now, when he mourned the burning that never came. It was then that the matter of Josiah Fenn broke over the table too, for Fenn had come. He had come uninvited, in his good black coat, and he stood now at the back of the room, and when he saw how the thing had fallen, when he saw his debtor exposed before the whole county, ruined past any hope of raising £2,000 from a name now worth nothing. Fenn did the coldest thing of that cold afternoon. He stepped forward, And he addressed himself not to the Lord, but to the magistrate and the company, and he called his markers in, out loud, before them all. Since we are speaking of what Lord Ravensmere owes, Fenn said, in his flat Shrewsbury voice, let the county hear the whole account. His lordship's markers are held by me, £2,000, against an estate already mortgaged to its chimneys. The silver he pawned was the last thing in this house that was truly his to sell, and he sold it and blamed his housekeeper to hide it. I am owed, and I will be paid, out of whatever is left when the law is done with him. And he stepped back, having paid the Lord in the only coin he understood, public ruin, and having, without meaning to, set the last stone on the tomb of the man's good name. The rector and the county families, who a year ago had watched Eleanor Pryce stripped of her keys and had said among themselves what a sad thing, what a viper the woman had been, now watched the master of Ravensmere stripped of everything a man of his sort has. His name, his standing, his credit, his lie, and they said nothing. There was nothing to say. Eleanor did not gloat. She had not raised her voice, and she did not raise it now. She stood with her hands folded over her apron, in the place she had stood 10,000 times to take an order or give a report, and she watched the ruin of the man she had served, and she felt no triumph in it, only a great and terrible tiredness. And under the tiredness, very quiet, the settling of an old debt. She had kept the house honest. She had told the lady she would, and the lady was 31 years in the ground, and she had kept her word after all. That was all it was to her, a promise kept. Sir Henry Ashford put an end to it in the plain machinery of the law. He dismissed the charge of theft against Eleanor Pryce there and then, before the company, in words entered by his clerk into the county record, that the accused was innocent, that the pieces named were pawned by their owner and no theft committed, and that the charge was without foundation. He took up the 3 tickets and the 3 certified copies and had them entered into the record as evidence, and the matter of the false accusation and the concealed debt and whatever crimes hid under them he turned over, gravely and correctly, to the proper court, which would deal with a baron as it dealt with any man, in its own slow certain time. No hand was raised in that room, no voice but the law's. It was undone exactly where it had been done, on the white cloth, by the candles, before the same 9 faces, and that was the justice Eleanor had asked for, and it was enough. She walked out of Ravensmere Hall by the front door as she had come in. It was 6 months later, on a bright cold morning near Lady Day, that Eleanor Pryce sat by the window of her own small parlour in the village and took her tea and watched the light come up over the market square. She had a household again, not a great one. The estate had passed into the hands of a trustee, a sober man from the bank, for the Lord's affairs were being unwound by the courts and would be for years, and the trustee, wanting a person of unquestioned honesty to keep what was left of the place in order, had come to Eleanor Pryce cap in hand and offered her the keys of Ravensmere back. She had thanked him, and she had said no. She had given that house 31 years, and it had given her a doorstep and a broken name, and though the name was mended now, she found she had no more years in her to give to those cold rooms. Let strangers keep them. Instead, she had taken a small honest place in the village, a widow lady's household, 4 rooms and a garden. Decent people who paid on the day and said good morning. It was work a woman of 58 could do with one hand, after Ravensmere, and it suited her. The chatelaine keys, her own, the ones the trustee had pressed on her and she had, after a little thought, agreed to keep. Not the office, but the keys themselves, as a thing owed, those did not hang at her waist now. She had driven a nail into the wall beside her window, a nail she had chosen and set herself, and she had hung the keys there. Not granted to her by any master, not torn from her by any master. Hers, on a nail of her own choosing, in a room of her own. She looked at them sometimes over her tea, catching the morning light, and it pleased her in a way she did not try to put into words. They said Ravensmere was let to strangers now. Eleanor, hearing it from the fishmonger's wife, had only nodded and said, "Dry as ever, I hope they keep their receipts," and went on with her marketing. As for Josiah Fenn, he had his money in the end, or most of it, out of the wreck of the estate, for a man who lends to the desperate is always, in the end, paid, but never thanked, and never once in his life looked at by any soul with anything warmer than fear. Eleanor spared him no more than that one flat thought, and forgot him. Tom Fletcher had risen. The trustee told the whole story, had kept the boy on and marked him, and within the year Tom Fletcher, footman, was Tom Fletcher, butler, 19 turned 20 and grave with the weight of it, running the household of Ravensmere for its new tenants, with a straightness he had learned, he always said, from Mrs. Pryce he came to see her of a Sunday. He always would. And that was the whole of it. A woman gave her life honestly to a house, and the house turned on her, and the master she had served made her the instrument of his crime, because he believed a servant was a thing you use and throw down, a hand that keeps nothing, an instrument that cannot turn in your grip. He was wrong on the one point that mattered. She had kept the receipt. A life given honestly leaves a record no fire can burn and no lie can wash out, and hers had been written, in the end, in his own hand. She had kept the house honest, as she promised the lady. And that was enough for Eleanor Pryce, taking her tea by her own window in the good clean light of a morning that belonged to no one but herself. If this story reached you, leave one word, faithful, and tell me the town you're watching from.